Tomorrow we move in, son. It wasn't a question. My father never asked. He told, calm, certain, like weather that's already been forecasted. You didn't debate a thunderstorm, and you sure as hell didn't argue with him. I held the phone to my ear in silence, nodding as if he could see me through the line. Got it, I said, voice flat. I hung up and stared at the contract in front of me. $4.1 million. My name, my investment, my house. I smiled and gave him the contract the next morning. But this time, I had a plan. It wasn't just another visit. This wasn't about family coming together. Something had shifted, and not in their favor. Growing up, I was the youngest, which really just meant I was the most invisible. My older brother David got the first of everything: college tuition, praise, and even my father's respect. My sister Claire wasn't far behind. Dad called her the glue of the family. Me, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through school, sent money home when Dad lost his business, and still got left out of family group texts. They said I was independent. What they meant was I didn't complain when they walked right past me. Thanksgiving dinners, I was the one clearing plates. Family meetings, I sat in the corner. My suggestions never made it to the whiteboard. He's just quiet, they'd say, but that wasn't it. I was quiet because I knew my place. Backup plan, silent helper, the invisible pillar. So when Dad called to say they were moving in, again, into the house I bought, I didn't flinch, not outwardly, but inside, something turned. This house wasn't just a house. It was everything they thought I couldn't build. After the family lost theirs in the foreclosure mess, I stepped in, quietly. No parade, no big speech. I told them they could stay with me while they figured things out. They moved in like they owned the place. What would we do without you, Mom had said, ruffling my hair like I was still 12. Claire hugged me tight and said, we'll make it feel like home again. David patted my back and muttered, at least you had space. None of them asked what it cost me. The contract had one name on it, mine, but you wouldn't know that walking through the front door. Mom brought floral curtains, ugly ones, and had already measured for rods before she stepped inside. Claire had a laundry basket under each arm and called dibs on the guest room with the private bath. David cracked open a beer and asked where he should set up his work-from-home office. He hadn't worked in months. Dad wandered through like a general on inspection. Now this, he said, feels like a real home again. I smiled and handed him the key. Neighbor from 2 doors down leaned on the gate, watching. They all staying with you? He asked, squinting through the evening sun. I nodded. Yep, I said. All of them. But I knew something they didn't. They thought I gave them shelter. What I gave them was structure, and within that, control. I watched them move in with the same entitlement they'd always worn. Childhood came flooding back, not in waves, but in sudden punches. Missing prom to help David move. Driving 2 hours to pick Claire up from a party, only for her to pretend she didn't know me in front of her friends. Sitting across from my father while he praised everyone but me at Christmas dinner. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, unless they keep slapping you with it. That's something my old boss once told me. I didn't bite back then. But this wasn't then. I sat on the porch after everyone had gone to bed. The quiet settled deep in my bones. All those years of stepping aside, of keeping peace, had done one thing. They taught me how to wait. How long do you let family take before you start taking back? The next morning, over breakfast, Dad announced he'd be turning the study into his personal office. No, would it be okay? Just a statement, just like always. That way, he said, I'll finally have a place to get some work done. Right, son? I nodded, took another sip of coffee and smiled. That afternoon, I ordered new locks. They think I gave them a house. I gave them a trap. The boxes felt heavier than usual as I made my way up the stairs, suitcase in one hand, laptop bag slung across my shoulder. I knew exactly where I was headed. The guest room on the right. My room when they visited. The only space I ever claimed. But the door was already cracked open. Inside, Julian stood in front of the mirror, shirtless, humming to himself. His clothes were scattered across the bed, dresser half-filled. Hope you don't mind, he said, not looking up. Got here first. Before I could say a word, Dad's voice echoed from the hallway. You don't mind the basement, right? It's cooler down there anyway. Cooler. Right. I gave a half smile, said nothing. The basement smelled like forgotten things. There was chipped paint on the walls, one narrow window with a cracked pane, and a cot that looked like it belonged in a church shelter. They moved into my house and gave me the cellar. That was the first real fracture, when you're made small in a place that should feel safe. Upstairs, it didn't take long for the house to shift around me. Mom's voice filtered through the hallway, barking orders. Julian set up his monitors and speakers in the living room like it was his personal studio. Marla labeled the kitchen cabinets with cute handwritten tags. Snacks, spices, Marla's stuff. I watched from the sidelines as my home got repainted in their colors. She called one of her friends and said, "It feels so good to be back home." Back home. I stood in the kitchen doorway, jaw tight, listening to Dad go on about adding a fire pit in the backyard, maybe a patio extension. No one asked. No one looked at me. They didn't move in. They annexed. I'd seen this before. I grew up with the scraps. Julian always got the new room, the new car, the nod of approval. Marla got protected like a national treasure. And me, I got the leftovers. Hand-me-down shoes, second-tier advice, and the line, "You're the strong one, Cass. Strong ones don't need as much." Now that Mom's gone, that sentence circles in my head like a curse. Strength wasn't a compliment. It was a reason to ignore me. Strong ones don't need checking on. That night at dinner, the table was loud, messy, like old times. Julian went off about a new business venture, some cryptocurrency project he'd half invented. Dad nodded like he was talking to Steve Jobs. Marla shared her ideas for redoing the living room, throw pillows, accent walls, some boho chic meets modern farmhouse nonsense. I was asked to pass the gravy. Then someone joked, "Cass always the quiet one, huh?" They all laughed. I laughed too, but only with my mouth. No one saw how hard my hand gripped the edge of the table. No one noticed the way I stared at my plate, not tasting anything. They laughed because I'd never been a threat. But I wasn't laughing inside. I was watching. Measuring. After dinner, I stepped out to take the trash to the curb. The night was cool, the kind that felt like a warning. Mrs. Browning, the neighbor across the street, waved from her porch. "Cass," she said gently, "house seems a bit full these days." I nodded. "It's just temporary." She tilted her head, studying me for a moment. "They never treat temporary like they do permanent," she said. "Watch closely." That line, it didn't leave me. I went back inside, down to the basement, lay on the cot, arms folded behind my head, staring at the beams above me. Every thump of a footstep from upstairs was a reminder of who had taken what, and how easy it was for them. I reached for the folder on the floor beside the bed. The contract. I opened it. Read it slowly. Every clause, every signature, my name. "What if I reminded them who really signed this place?" I whispered. Not to hurt, just to be heard. The house wasn't the only thing with foundations they ignored. I woke before dawn, restless. The hush in the house felt wrong. Yesterday's tension still hummed in my bones. I shuffled into the kitchen, flicked on lights, poured coffee. The kettle hissed, then stilled. On the counter, a stack of opened envelopes lay splayed. White envelopes, bills, statements. My heart stuttered. I picked up one addressed to Alvin Harrow. Property tax bill, Oakfield Estates. But not in my name. Legally, the house was mine. But someone had begun rerouting paperwork. My palms went dry. I hesitated. I shuffled through the papers. An address, an account number, my financial institution, all shifted. They weren't just living here. They were reworking the foundation I thought was solid. Later that morning, I called my insurance company. I framed it casually, just checking things. When I asked about the primary contact, the rep said, "Yes, it's now Charles Harrow. That change was made 3 weeks ago online." My throat tightened. "I never made that update," I said quietly. I asked for timestamps, method, IP details. She paused. "It was done via form, yes," she confirmed. I hung up before panic could crack my voice. That wasn't a mistake. It was a move. I stood at the window and stared at the yard. Of course, the gift of letting them live here was now a passive offense. It was turning into leverage. Betrayal dressed in casual kindness. I felt lightheaded, uncertain. The gift wasn't undone yet, but it was being weaponized. A memory surfaced. Mom's hearing of her will. A muted room. Father stood and said, "She entrusted me to see it through." No objections, no questions. I stayed silent. I didn't want to seem greedy, but that silence let him write the story. He always said, "Family doesn't need signatures." I swallowed hard, but now it seemed signatures mattered more than ever. That evening, I had a reason to be in the study. I pretended to deliver a report for the foundation. Hidden behind the doorframe, I spotted a folder labeled Long-Term Residence Plan, Oakfield. My chest hollowed. I cracked it open. Inside were emails, contractor bids, property reconfigurations, proposed deed amendments. My name only once, buried as our son who assists in tax payments. Nothing real, everything passive. They were planning permanence without talking to me. I closed the folder, deliberately, no crumple, no glare, just a steady calm. They didn't move in, they took over, and they never looked back. That night at dinner, Dad proffered a form, utility adjustment, and asked me to sign. I watched him across the table and said, "Sure, let's look at Clause 5 together." His lips curved in surprise. He chuckled, then muttered, "We're family. No need for fine print." But the fine print was always there. I slid the document off the plate, didn't sign it. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I crept to the basement. The same cot, the same narrow window. I pulled out the original contract, pages softened by time. I touched each signature, each clause, my name, bold. I whispered into the still air, "I didn't imagine this life. I built it, I paid for it, and now they're rewriting it without me." My pulse drum rolled. Silence closed in. I sat there until the lights upstairs flicked off. I rose and spoke aloud. "This isn't about rooms or respect. It's about erasure." My eyes burned for deeper clarity. The betrayal was quiet, but it was real, and I knew I was never part of their plan. I had been the obstacle they had to get past. The message buzzed in at 6:42 a.m. "Dad, please sign this minor addendum for utilities." On the coffee table. Minor, that word, again. I pulled on a hoodie, padded out of the basement and into the living room. The morning sun was spilling through the blinds. There it was, crisp paper laid neatly next to the TV remote with a blue pen already set beside it. My name was typed at the bottom. Dad sat on the far couch, one leg crossed, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. Calm, patient, watching me. I didn't touch the paper yet. I just looked at him. He didn't flinch. I picked up the document. 3 pages, clean formatting. Title, Residential Utility Adjustment and Addendum. I started reading. By paragraph 2, my pulse kicked up. This wasn't about utility billing. Buried deep were clauses referencing cohabitational interest, equal resident access, and a vague right to modification of property structure. One section even referenced automatic transfer of liability after 30 days. I took it to the dining table, laid it flat, opened my laptop and pulled up the original house contract. Took a highlighter, compared line by line. Clause 5 was new, so was Clause 8. My name was there, but the intent wasn't mine. Dad stood and wandered over slowly, coffee in hand. "It's just formality, Cass. Legal fluff. Nothing really changes." I looked up and asked, "Let's read Clause 5 together, then." He blinked once. Didn't speak. Then, like a switch had flipped, a memory rose. The year I turned 16, he gave me a car, but the title was in his name. Shared use, he'd said. He controlled who drove it, when, how long. He told me, "You'll never lose anything if you don't own it fully." Back then, I thought he was being protective. Now I realized it was training. I set the pen down, pushed the paper a little further from me. He sat across from me, still calm, but I could see the muscles at his jaw begin to clench. "This gives you access to everything I built," I said quietly. "And I wouldn't even know it was happening until it's done." He said, "I'm doing what's best for the family." And right then, Marla and Dylan walked in. Marla stopped cold. Dylan held a half-eaten apple. Everyone froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I tapped Clause 5 with my finger. It activates in 30 days unless revoked in writing, but I never agreed to it in the first place. No one moved. Just the hum of the fridge behind us. Then Seraphine stepped in through the side door. She was carrying a bag of groceries, glanced around, and caught my eye. She walked over, handed me a bottle of water, and whispered, "You might want to call Theron." Then she subtly showed me her phone screen, an email thread with Theron Blythe, our old family lawyer. Lines highlighted, notes flagged, red flag language. This addendum should not be signed without full legal review. I nodded, eyes still locked on Dad. She gave my shoulder a light squeeze and turned away like nothing happened. That shift, it settled something inside me. I had an ally now, one they didn't see coming. I looked back down at the paper, then at Dad. "No," I said. "I'm not signing this." Dad's jaw flexed. He stood slowly, tried to chuckle it off. "Cass, come on. I won't be the one who gives away his name just to stay liked." He stared at me. This time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, not smugness, fear. Just for a second. I stood up, walked past him, set the pen down on the kitchen counter. I didn't look back. At the window, I paused. The yard was still, nothing moved, but inside me something had, because the signature you printed beneath my name wasn't mine. The house felt different. You know how sometimes a room can hum without sound? Like something's coiled up behind the walls, waiting? That's what it felt like walking through my own hallway that afternoon. The TV in the den, usually babbling some news channel or rerun, was silent. The kitchen smelled like fresh lemon, but nobody was cooking. Seraphine barely looked up from her notebook. Dylan was on the porch pacing, muttering into his phone. Dad was running errands. It wasn't tension, it was rehearsal. They were getting ready for something. I just didn't know what. Yet. So I sat at the counter with a legal pad, not journaling, just writing names, dates, small changes. The day the mailbox nameplate switched, when the deed notice disappeared from the fridge, when Julian suddenly became primary contact with the insurance. A Navy vet once told me over whiskey, when the air goes quiet, get ready to fire. This house was silent as a trap. Later that afternoon, I walked into the living room. Marla was standing on a stepladder, swapping out a framed photo. It used to be Mom, sitting on the porch, book in her lap, her old sun hat tilted just enough to block her grin. Now it was some beige landscape, generic, forgettable. "What happened to Mom's photo?" I asked. She didn't even turn. It was dusty. I said nothing, just stood there. The next thing I knew, Dad's recliner, the one from their old house, had replaced my chair in the corner. A box of my books had been moved to the garage without asking. Dylan invited some friends over, folks I didn't recognize, laughing in my kitchen like they'd paid the mortgage. I left polite notes on the fridge. "Please ask before redecorating. Let's talk about shared spaces." None of them disappeared, but none got responses either. Dylan walked by one morning, grinning, chewing on cereal. "That's just how family rolls, man. Loosen up." I didn't answer. But I started testing the line. I unplugged the new Bluetooth stereo they'd installed, dug out Mom's old record player from the attic, set it right where it used to be. I cleaned it, polished the needle, set on a Nat King Cole album. That record hadn't even finished side A before Dad came to the basement door. "That thing's not safe for the wiring anymore," he said, forced casual. I didn't flinch. "It's more than safe. It's sacred." His face twitched. That was the moment I knew. Sacred means nothing to him. Leverage does. And silence? That wasn't peace to him. It was a green light. Late afternoon, I went back up to the attic, sorting boxes, old clothes, tools, stuff Mom never let anyone throw out. Seraphine came in, quiet as always. She handed me a folded cloth. My heart paused. The handkerchief, embroidered corners, my initials. "Mom gave it to me when I was 14, said, 'Keep something soft for the hard days.'" Seraphine said, "They're acting like it's already theirs, but you're still here." We sat by the window. She whispered, "Get your own lawyer. Protect yourself, quietly." That cloth, it was more than a keepsake now. It was anchor. "You're not reacting anymore," she said. "You're responding." That's when everything turned. That night at dinner, I waited until the plates were out, conversation mid-flow. Dylan was telling some pointless story about gym equipment. Then I said, "By the way, my attorney's coming next week. We're updating some estate documents." The room went still. Dad looked up, glass halfway to his mouth. "Oh?" "Just want to make sure my wishes are clear," I said, chewing slowly. "Wouldn't want confusion down the line." Marla choked on her tea. Dylan stood up, said he had a call. No one looked at me directly. That was the first time I understood the power of quiet truth. You don't need volume, just timing. They heard me. Every word. I cleared my plate, walked it to the sink, and stepped outside. Later that night, I lay in the dark, basement silent above me. I wasn't angry. I woke before the sun that Saturday, not because I couldn't sleep. I'd already burned through that kind of restlessness earlier in the week. This time, it was intention. I had a list, a plan, and a bitter kind of clarity. I started by clearing out the guest bedroom. I carried in a small desk, a filing cabinet, a floor lamp I'd tucked away in the garage. The bed frame came apart easily. I folded the linens, left them neatly stacked on the floor. Then I moved to the living room. Marla's decorating had crept in over the past week. Magazines, trinkets, coastal chic throw pillows. I placed her stack of Better Homes and Gardens in a bin, taped a note to the lid. "Please claim by Sunday." Dylan, catching sight of the box, leaned in from the hallway and smirked. "Trying to make a statement, man?" I didn't look up. "No, I'm setting boundaries." I ordered a keypad lock for my bedroom. This wasn't about subtlety anymore. It was a shift, a line drawn. Later that morning, I came into the kitchen and saw a sheet of paper sitting on the counter. Plain, no envelope, but the top line said, "Revised will, draft." Seraphine must have left it by accident. I hadn't meant for them to see it yet. Marla saw it first. Her mouth tightened. She read far enough to realize her name wasn't there. Dylan's either. I caught Dad's eye from across the room. He said nothing. But that silence, it hit harder than any shouting could. He didn't ask. He didn't question. Just stood there, lips pressed, jaw set. By evening, the family meeting was called. Marla acted like it was a peace offering. It wasn't. They sat me down, said they were concerned about my choices, that I was being paranoid, cold, cruel. I listened. I let them talk. Then I hit record on my phone and set it face down on the table. When they finished, I said, "A shared roof doesn't mean shared intentions." I stood up, left the room, and never looked back. But they did. That night, while I was out grabbing groceries, someone had been in my room. I noticed right away the envelope I'd hidden under the mattress, the one holding Mom's handwritten notes on the original house deed, had been moved, folded differently, touched. I gathered the family in the den. "Someone went into my room," I said plainly. "Which one of you was it?" Marla raised her eyebrows. "Why would we?" "That's your paranoia talking again." I held the altered envelope up. "Because this isn't how I left it." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, get over yourself. You were never meant to keep this house anyway." I turned slightly, phone in hand, the screen still recording. "Thank you for admitting that on camera." She turned scarlet. Dylan whispered something I couldn't hear. Marla stormed off, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Dad knocked on my door that night. "You got a minute?" he asked. I nodded. He came in, hands in his pockets, tried to wear the old mask of reasonable father. "You've always been dramatic, you know that?" I kept my voice even. "You've always underestimated what silence costs." He didn't answer at first. "You're burning bridges, son." "No," I said. "I'm refusing to live under one." His face changed. That look when someone realizes the control they counted on is slipping. "I never meant to hurt you," he offered. "And yet, here we are." There was no explosion, no final blowout, just a quiet, irreversible turn. The next morning I acted, not reacted. I called my attorney, asked to expedite the review of the eviction clauses, installed a new home security system, biometric, facial recognition, sent a formal document via email and hard copy, outlining shared space boundaries, consequences for violations, and expectations for cohabitation. No yelling, no bargaining, just facts. They hadn't seen this version of me, but they'd forced it. Because if they wanted a war, they just lost the element of surprise. The driveway was full before sunset. SUVs lined the curb. Laughter drifted from the backyard. The smell of catered appetizers, nothing homemade, floated through the air like perfume trying too hard to impress. I stood just inside the front door as people filed in, relatives I hadn't seen in years, neighbors I barely remembered. A few folks I didn't recognize at all, likely Marla's real estate friends or Dad's casual investors. Everyone greeted me like I was the doorman. Marla's voice rang out bright and scripted. "Welcome, welcome. Come see the new touches we've made. We're calling it a renewal of the Harrow House." She guided a group down the hallway. When they reached what used to be the guest bedroom, now my office, she smiled wide. "We freshened up this room too. Makes such great use of the space, doesn't it?" They nodded, admiring the crisp white paint, the tasteful minimalism. I watched from the doorway, silent. No one asked who had painted it, or who moved the furniture, or why it had been changed at all. I wasn't mentioned once. It was a strange kind of theater, and I was standing in the wings of a play performed inside my own home. As the evening settled into rhythm, I drifted toward the living room. That's when I noticed the wall. A photo display, big, well-lit, centered right above the mantel. New frames. Updated arrangement. Marla, Dad, Dylan, that's it. My chest tightened as I scanned it again. No picture of me, not even one of Mom, just 3 people playing house. A few guests paused, murmuring. One woman whispered to another, "Didn't Cass used to live here too?" Another guest asked, "Where's the photo with his mother?" I didn't speak, just stepped closer to the wall. There was a gap, where a picture had clearly been removed. The blank space said more than any photo ever could. Not a mistake, a message. Outside the kitchen, I overheard a neighbor compliment Marla. "You've done wonders with these walls. They look so different now." Dad chuckled. "Just a little polish. She's got great taste." Someone asked, "Is Cass moving in for good?" Marla smiled, soft and non-committal. "We'll see. He's transitioning." The word hung like smoke. I turned before I could hear more. Polite nods, polished lies. Every compliment was a cut, dulled just enough to make it palatable in public. After the tour, when most guests gathered in the den, drinks in hand, I stood up. "Thanks everyone for coming," I said, voice steady. "This house has a lot of stories. Some of you lived through them with us." I paused. This home is mine, legally. And while I'm glad you're enjoying the updates, I hope you'll also remember its history, the people who built it, who bled into these walls. Marla's smile cracked. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not make tonight about paperwork, son." I looked right at him. This house wasn't handed down to be rewritten. It was meant to remember. A murmur spread through the room. Guests looked around, no one quite sure if this was part of the evening or a mistake unfolding in real time. "I just thought that should be said," I finished. And then I walked out back past the laughter into the dark. I stood alone under the porch light, hands in my pockets, feeling everything at once. Humiliation, fury, a deep ache that had no clean name. I pulled the embroidered handkerchief from my jacket pocket, the one Mom gave me when I left for college. I held it tight. "They erased me," I whispered. "Tonight, they remember me." And just like that, something inside me solidified. This wasn't going to be another quiet fade into the background. I wasn't going to sit and watch them replace history with their version. No more warnings, no more speeches. It would be exposure, strategy, precision. I turned and headed back toward the house. As I re-entered the den, the music had shifted to low jazz. I scanned the room. Dylan stood by the drink cart, swirling bourbon in a glass like he'd earned it. He saw me, smiled. Not friendly. Calculated. Sharp. He thought I wouldn't strike, that I'd stay quiet forever, that my reflection, my presence, could be scraped off and forgotten. But he forgot something about mirrors. They crack. And when they do, they don't just distort. They cut. I woke up early, but I didn't rush. No sound came from the kitchen. No clatter, no fake greetings. Just that kind of morning quiet that feels loaded, like the silence was waiting to see who'd speak first. I didn't. I walked past the living room without a glance. No nod to Marla, no eye contact with Dad. Dylan wasn't even in sight, maybe still sleeping off the night before. Instead, I went to my room, shut the door, and backed up every file from my voice recorder, folder after folder, each labeled by date and detail, contract comment, Marla bedroom entry, ceiling mic test. Then I pulled out the property documents and highlighted the key terms: sole ownership, breach of privacy, cohabitant clauses. My pen moved slow, deliberate. No shaking hands, just a mind done being manipulated. I remembered what Jennifer once said in a workshop: power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up with the right paperwork. By 10 o'clock, I was parked in front of her law office. Jennifer greeted me with that no-nonsense look. No hugs, no sugarcoat, just business. Everything? She asked. I handed over the binder and a USB. Timeline, audio, 2 video clips, signed affidavit from the contractor confirming I was sole project manager on the renovations, and text screenshots from Dylan confirming intent to take what's rightfully ours. She scanned through quickly, then leaned back, expression sharpened. This isn't just toxic family. This is sabotage. Intentional. You've got leverage. Let's pull it. We reviewed the options. I signed off on 2 filings. 1, a restraining clause against Marla under co-dwelling misuse. 2, a cease and desist for Dylan tied to verbal harassment and property violation. Jennifer added a 3rd motion to classify the house as contested territory, barring non-listed residents from legal access until reviewed. Before I left, she looked me straight in the eye. "You're not fighting people anymore," she said. "You're correcting the paperwork." At 3:17 that afternoon, the first document arrived at the Harrow house, delivered by hand from the county clerk. A second one followed less than 10 minutes later. I didn't go to the door. But I heard the reaction: Marla's sharp intake of breath, Dylan's voice rising, then crashing, Dad's heavy steps down the hall, then silence. The kind that wasn't peaceful. It was displaced, shaken. I stayed in my room. Let the walls hold it all. The paper had spoken. An hour later, I found myself on the back porch, coffee in hand, feet propped on the railing. My phone buzzed with messages. Cousins, old friends. "Hey, heard things got tense last night. You okay?" I didn't answer. Not from spite, just clarity. And I didn't need anyone to verify I was right. I knew I was. This wasn't about proving something, it was about enforcing it. Erasure had given me space, and that space let me redraw everything, on my terms. I thought of Mom, her last year, her voice thin but steady. "You don't win by screaming, sweetheart. You win by outlasting." That line stayed with me, more now than ever. I was outlasting, and they were starting to see it. After sundown, as the house went mostly quiet, I sat at my desk reading an old letter Mom had written, tucked behind one of her recipe cards. Just her handwriting, smooth and certain. That's when the knock came. Not loud, not demanding, just one soft knock. I opened the door to find Dad standing there. No anger, just tired eyes. In his hand, the $4.1 million contract. He held it out like it weighed nothing. "Is this what you want to fight for?" he asked. I didn't take the paper. I looked at him, then said, "No. This is what I want to finish." I woke before the sun. The air in the house felt still, but not heavy this time. I slipped on a worn t-shirt, walked barefoot from room to room, no plan, just instinct. The hardwood creaked under my steps like it always had. Same floor, different feeling. I let my fingers trail along the edges of the kitchen counters, the hallway walls, the trim I repainted just a few weeks ago. I paused in the doorway of the guest room, now empty again. A patch of wall still showed the faint outline of a frame Marla once hung. I had painted over it. Twice. It hit me, standing there. This house didn't owe me anything. I didn't need it to apologize or to remember me. I had outlasted what needed outlasting. "The war's over when you stop looking for the next bullet," Mr. Langston, my neighbor, had said once. I didn't get it back then. I get it now. By mid-morning, I was dressed in navy, Mom's favorite, a clean suit, no fuss. I tied my own hair back, something I hadn't done in months. My hands were steady, calm. The $4.1 million contract sat on the kitchen counter, neatly clipped, notes color-coded, pages tabbed. Next to it, Mom's locket. I tucked both into my leather folder. No bitterness, no triumph, just readiness. City Hall's historical room had an old-world quiet to it. Ornate walls, dust in the light. A place built for decisions. Jennifer greeted me at the door, nodding. Inside, witnesses waited. Not many. Enough. That's when Dad arrived. Alone. No Marla. No Dylan. Just him and an envelope. He walked up to me, slower than usual. In his hand, a folded piece of paper. Soft around the edges. Yellowed. He said, "I kept this. Never knew why." I opened it. Recognized my own writing. 12 years old, pencil shaky. "I want to build houses someday. Real homes." He didn't say sorry. Didn't need to. His hands shook slightly as we exchanged pens. We signed. The notary stamped. Silence. Afterward, I walked to the front of the room, no speech prepared, no audience really expecting one, but I spoke anyway. Some wars aren't won, they're walked away from. I placed the deed into the leather envelope, rested the keys on top, stepped back. It didn't feel like losing, and it didn't feel like winning either. It just felt over. That evening, back at the house one last time, I stood on the porch, locked the door from the outside. The swing was still hanging there, swaying slightly in the breeze. I snapped a photo. One last piece of this chapter. Inside my journal, I wrote, "I didn't just survive. I rebuilt." The sun was low when I got into the car. No music, just the sound of the engine humming. My thoughts drifting. Halfway down the road, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. "Jennifer, your next property's ready. Clean title. You're clear." I didn't say anything out loud, but I smiled. Not because it was over, but because I got to begin again. The silence in my rearview wasn't empty. It was earned.